Devin Graves coming to you once again from Studio D, and today I want to talk about what is really important in the home studio. When you come into the world of recording, home recording, you have a lot of questions, and out there is a lot of advice and opinions. Some of it is useful and good advice, some of it is misleading, and some of it is just plain bad advice. When we don't know what we need to know about recording, it's all a big mystery, and the first thing we do is we tend to look towards the gear, these esoteric magical totems that are going to somehow bestow all the warmth and punch and clarity and definition on the recordings that we make. What if I told you that none of that really matters? Three things matter. Three things matter the most. One is the acoustic space, the acoustic treatment in your room. Two is your monitoring. How accurate is your monitor system? And three, your talent. What can you bring to the table that is worth recording, that is worth listening to? A recording studio is not just a collection of gear. It's a listening space. It is a room designed for the reproduction of sound, and a monitor system that is designed to accurately reproduce what it is you're recording and what it is you're mixing. And it is these two things together and these two things alone that are going to make or break how great your studio is. Everything else you put in there is only going to be icing on the cake. You can use just about any microphone out there. You can use just about any preamp out there, and you can use just about any audio interface. And as long as you record a good performance of a good song in a good room, you're going to be fine. I'm not saying that expensive gear doesn't make a difference. It does. It is good. What I'm saying is it doesn't make the difference. As long as your mics and your preamps aren't causing any problems getting in your way. And nowadays, that's almost anything available. Back when I started, it was a different story. I had a mixer from Tascam that was noisy, that had these thermal spikes. It sounded pretty poor also. And that was where all of my questions began. How do they get these amazing recordings? What knobs do I twist to end up with that result? The truth was, back then, those knobs I had to be thrown away and replaced. The Mackie 8-bus console that came out after got me in the ballpark. It at least got me to where I can make a recording that is clean and clear and big, and it wasn't something just filled with impossible things to fix. And that's where a lot of these myths come from. Myths about how important the mic preamps are. Back in my day of starting, that was absolutely true. Same goes for mics. The really good mics were very, very expensive, and there was no affordable mic that was anywhere near close. This was in the early 1990s. Now times have changed. Now you can get excellent results with even the most rudimentary gear and stock plugins. Plugins didn't even exist when I started. It was all done on analog tape. First, let's talk about microphones. Throughout my career, I sang through a lot of different good classic microphones. A Social Grace Psychotic Waltz was done, I sang through an AKG C414. That would be the original version. On Into the Everflow, I sang through a Neumann TLM 170. I'm pretty sure that was the microphone. On Mosquito, this was the biggest budget production we ever did, and I sang through a classic Neumann U47, a coveted U47. And on Bleeding, I sang through a Neumann U67. And actually, this was the first time I ever sang through a mic and thought, that's it. That's the sound. That's the sound I was trying to find. Even the U47 didn't give me that. Everything sounded fine. Everything sounded good, but none of them wowed me until the U67. Does that mean the U67 is the only possible vocal mic? No, it doesn't matter. Okay, I liked the sound. It doesn't mean that that was the only possible sound, because I had more successful records done with different microphones. In fact, the Mosquito album, I sang through a U47. It was mixed on an SSL console with flying faders. It was by far the highest level of production gear ever since and before. This was the pinnacle. Yet this was the least successful album. Why? A Social Grace was mixed on a lowly Yamaha console. No flying faders. We did it all by hand. All of us sitting across the board mixing by hand. Yamaha console. Into the Everflow was mixed on an Otari console. But those two albums were by far more successful. It wasn't the gear. It was the content. It was the songs. That is what really matters. If you fast forward a little bit to my first home recordings that I did professionally, Dead Soul Tribe, back in 2000, 2001, I had a Mac G4 400, a copy of eMagic's Logic 4, I believe. Might have been Logic 5, don't remember. No third-party plugins. I had just a basic set of mics, SM57s around the toms and the snare, just dynamic mic on the kick, SM81 small diaphragm condensers for the overheads, all going into a Mackie 8-bus console. Then I had a Neumann microphone that was a M147, plugged into my only really good mic preamp channel strip, which is a Focusrite ISA 430, which I still have right back there. In fact, I have a pair of them. And that was it. And on the second Dead Soul Tribe album, I upgraded the drum mics to Sennheiser 421s on the toms and AKG C414 TL2s for the overheads. And more importantly, I upgraded my studio monitors. Now, this is something that's worth talking about, because this is one of the things I stressed about what is important. Previously, I had been using Tannoy PBM 6.5s. This is a passive monitor that cost about $250 for a pair, along with the passive monitors that used a Alesis RA100 amplifier. And the speakers sounded boxy. They sounded, that's what they sounded like. They sounded boxy. And I was able to make a mix through these speakers that sounded big and full, rich, huge, powerful. And that was the problem, because they only sounded big, huge, full, rich, and powerful in the studio on those speakers. But anywhere else, in the car, in the home stereo, on the boombox, everywhere else, it was a muddy mess. Sounded terrible. I was making the speakers do what they were not designed to do, fooling myself into thinking I was getting a great mix. When I did the upgrades for A Murder of Crows, the second Dead Soul Tribe album, I ditched those Tannoys and put in a set of Mackie HR24s, which had a very wide frequency response, all the way down to like 35 hertz, 33 hertz, 35 hertz, all the way up to 22 kilohertz, and ruler flat. And all of a sudden, the mixes I was getting in the studio were sounding much, much, much better elsewhere. There was still some work to do because the room wasn't ideal. There was still some problems with the room. Basically, the acoustic treatment, it was covered in foam. The walls were covered in foam. I'll expand on that a little bit later, because we are talking about these important things, the acoustic treatment and the monitors. But having said that, with that rudimentary equipment, just the Mackie console, one good preamp. Okay, there was a second preamp that was a DBX 586. It was a tube 2-channel preamp that I used for the overheads, and I used it also for DI, the clean channel guitars, and the bass. And that actually sounded really good in that application. That preamp is all but spit on today. You could probably find it for $100 on eBay. Nobody recommends them. Nobody likes them. But I did get a really nice, clean channel guitar through those. You can listen to the early Dead Soul Tribe albums, and actually every Dead Soul Tribe album, and that is what I used for the clean guitars. And a little EQ on there made a really nice, clean guitar sound. So that's what I did with it. Now, since then, I've made a lot of investments. I added tube compressors that I threw on the toms. I added stereo tube compressors for the overheads, another tube mic preamp that I used for overheads and eventually put the bass into, and kind of upgraded the bass sound. I upgraded my computer. I added UAD cards, 2 of them, and started using these emulation plugins of these classic compressors that I've been reading so much about, namely the LA2A and the 1176, and getting these classic emulations to work with. Buying new plugins of virtual instruments, like orchestral instruments that were way beyond what I was capable of doing before. So my infrastructure was really growing. Were my records more successful as a result? Nope. A Murder of Crows was the sweet spot. That was the pinnacle. I didn't need any more equipment. I needed to keep writing songs that were as good as A Murder of Crows. In my defense, I actually tried to do that, and that was kind of my mistake. Maybe they were too similar. Whatever it is, A Murder of Crows was the most successful solo album I ever made, and it was done with equipment far inferior to anything that you can get off the shelf on the lowest budget today. And in fact, as it turns out, all the gear that I had juggled since was really there to try and fix problems that was actually caused by my room. I had moved from the small room that I did the first 2 records in into a bigger room in a house that had this really high A-frame ceiling with drywall on all the walls. And in that room, it really sounded horrible. I mean, you can clap your hand. It was a terrible echo, terrible sounding room. And I'd done a lot of reading in magazines, and I came across this ad for RLX acoustic foam, and I bought this kit. It was probably $2,500 for this kit, which is a bunch of acoustic foam, some of these thick wedges that were supposed to be bass traps that go in all the corners, and then these things called T-fusers, which are diffusers. And I put them all up in the room, and to my ear, the room it didn't sound bad anymore. No echo, no slap, and I thought, okay, I'm done. So I would start doing my recordings, making the 3rd album, The January Tree, there. And one thing I noticed is that no matter what microphones I'd use for overheads, no matter what preamps I'd use, everything sounded a little bit dark. And so I would try other things, a new preamp, a new EQ, new microphones, and they all sounded too dark to me. I don't know what it was. Am I not buying the right mic? Am I not buying the right preamp? Do I have the wrong EQ? What is it that I'm doing wrong? What is it that I don't have? The answer was in the acoustic treatment, namely and first and foremost, bass traps. The wedges that came with the RLX foam did nothing in the way of reducing bass. Nothing. It might take care of flutter echo that comes from the corners and maybe some kind of help in the low end, but absolutely really nothing. And what I was hearing was this overemphasis of the low frequencies. All the high frequencies were being absorbed from the foam, and that's why everything sounded dark. It was an imbalance of the frequency response of the room. The echo and the reverb of the room was calmed and tamed and cured by the foam, but the frequency imbalance was a big problem, and the human ear just can't hear it. At least mine couldn't, but the microphones can. And the first thing I did is buy a bunch of Owens Corning 703, this fiberglass, rigid fiberglass. I had read about this, and I made my own bass traps, and I put them all over the room. I mean, really all over the place. And it didn't cost me that much money to do. It was all DIY. I built some wooden frames and hung them all up on the walls. And that's when I did the album, The Shadow Theory, Behind the Black Veil. And that was the first record where it started to sound half decent. The room was still bad dimensionally, okay? It was still kind of working against me, but I was getting somewhere. And it wasn't until I moved to this room where I have really, really a great sound. This room has a reasonably high ceiling, almost 9 feet high. It's reasonably wide dimensions, 20 feet by, It's about the size of a big bedroom and a little bedroom together. And above the drums is a scalloped ceiling, so it keeps the reflections from being these direct reflections. You don't get room modes because of that. And I have corner traps everywhere, thick corner traps. I have broadband absorption on every point of first reflection, on every wall. It doesn't matter if I'm in the mix position or if I'm recording somewhere or if I'm in the drum room there. From every mic that's around that drum set, every point of first reflection either has broadband absorption or tube traps. Or there's some diffusion in there as well, but not much. It's mostly absorption. I find that in a small room, there's no sense in trying to record the ambience of a small room. That's just not going to work for you. But on my broadband absorption, I do have these surfaces that have wood and slats, so they do reflect some of the high frequencies back, yet absorb most of the energy all the way around. Ceiling clouds. This room is really dialed in. It's a lot of acoustic treatment, and it's a lot of money and a lot of investment in that. But having done that, this room, those drums sound fantastic. And it doesn't matter if I record with my Mackie preamps, or if I use API, or if I use Neve, or anything else, it's going to sound good. Will the APIs sound better? Yes. Will the Neve sound better? Yes. But do I need them? No. This room sounds good. And with a little knowledge of how to set up mics, which is kind of another subject, the drum sounds fantastic. You can listen to Eric Clayton's 1,000 Scars, and I did that in this room with you can see it right above there, this 8-channel Mackie Onyx 800R. They're just preamps, but they're very good preamps. Very good AD conversion in there, and that's the drum sound. I used, I think, the Focusrite for the kick drum, and I used this red preamp down here. It's a tube preamp. I use that for the snare, and that is a phenomenal drum sound on that record. But it's mostly because of this room. That gear could use, okay, it did its part, but it didn't make or break the record sound. It just got me closer to the finish line. And that's kind of where expensive gear comes in. It doesn't make or break whether or not you're going to succeed. All it does is get you closer to that finished mix sound. You'd have to use less plugins. You have to do less in the mix if you record going in, getting the sound that you want. That means a little bit of EQ. That means a little bit of compression sometimes. And by doing that and knowing what you're doing, you can record a vocal, for instance, and then that vocal doesn't really need much tweaking afterwards. Now, when I do my vocals, I have now this coveted U67 microphone. It gives me that sound that I really love right off the mic. I go into the Neve 1073. Why a Neve 1073? That's just what all the greats say. Neve 1073 is the vocal preamp. So I bought one, and lo and behold, it is an excellent preamp. For vocals, I wouldn't say. For singing is what I would say. And I'll get back to that. But then there's the 1176 compressor. So a 1073 into an 1176. And almost every highbrow engineer in the world over is going to say those are your go-tos. And they're right. They are. But I first learned them by experimenting with the plugins. And it was getting to know the plugins, getting to know the 1176 and getting to know the LA2A, what I liked about them and what they were good for, is what gave me the knowledge to know I should invest in the hardware. And in doing so, again, I'm able to record the sound up front using these things, not needing plugins in the end, after the fact, making the mix shorter, making the recording more mix ready. What I want to drive home is, once you spend your money and your attention on acoustic treatment, then an excellent set of monitors. And I would urge you to get the best monitors you can afford. If you spend a lot of money on anything, spend it on these two things, and also know what you're doing. You want all your points of first reflection covered with broadband absorption. Use the 4-inch stuff if you can, because you can get it in 2-inch and 4-inch thicknesses. Just don't screw around. Just get 4 inches. You can stack them up. If you have good frames, you can just stand them freestanding and put them a few inches away from the wall so you have a little air gap behind. That increases the effective thickness and the absorption of low frequencies proportionately by that air gap. Just do it. Don't forget overhead. That's called a ceiling cloud. No frames up there. It's too heavy. Just use the broadband at the Corning 703. Wrap it in some cloth and hang it from the ceiling above the mix position. I have 3 of them that are 2 feet by 4 feet by 4 inches. 3 of them right next to each other. This kind of acoustic treatment you cannot overdo. Get it in every point of first reflection, not only from the mix position, but as I was talking about, also from the mic position, from above, from the sides, and you are going to be covered. Any mic is going to sound decent. Just about anything out there. You can spend less than $300 and get a Lewitt LCT 440, and that's probably as good as any vocal mic you need. Will it be like super silky and rich? No, maybe not. But all it needs to be is accurate and, more importantly, not cause any problems. For a vocal mic, you can either get a large diaphragm condenser mic like the Lewitt I was talking about on the low end of the budget, or you can get one of these. This is the Shure SM7B. This is one of the most famous vocal dynamic mics in the world over. This is famously known for recording Michael Jackson on Billie Jean, maybe Thriller. I'm not sure. It doesn't even matter. Red Hot Chili Peppers, nearly every song they've ever done was sang through one of these. This is really good also for aggressive singing, where there's a lot of edge, where there's a lot of throat and spit in the sound. A large diaphragm condenser mic sometimes is too revealing and sometimes shines too much light on all of that harshness, and so it sounds harsh. So a good dynamic mic, particularly the SM7B, is going to round that off and make an aggressive singer sound smoother. It also sounds really big on the bottom end. And a dynamic mic by its nature can take really loud sound pressure level. On the other hand, if you're more of a singer that needs detail and air, then get a large diaphragm condenser mic. So just with a decent interface, and the one that I recommend, my favorite audio interface by far. Okay, I use Pro Tools HD interfaces, and that's a subject for another discussion. But if you're just using a native system, just using a laptop and any off-the-shelf interface, I recommend the Audient ID44. The reason is it sounds excellent, first of all. I experimented with the Focusrite Scarlett series. They do sound really good. They're great. But if you use a mic like this one and you have to really turn the gain up, they get noisy pretty quick. And the ID44 is really dead silent up until the very last 5%, 10% of the throw on the pot. So using a cloud lifter or a Soyuz launcher like I'm using to raise the level of such a mic, going into the ID44, it sounds really, really good. Furthermore, there is an insert, a balanced insert on the first two channels. So if you want to add a compressor, you can do so. Having compression going in is a good way to keep your levels under control, so your loud singing isn't too loud and clipping, and the quiet singing is brought up in level in comparison, so it's going to sit better in the mix. Also, you have ADAT expandability. There are two sets of ADAT ins and outs. So you have the 4 mic preamps built in, which for any standard home studio singer-songwriter type, that should be enough. But if you decide you want to record a full drum set or maybe even a full band live off the floor, you don't need to get a new interface. You just need to add mic preamps in banks of 8. And you can have a total of 20 inputs on this unit. It's really, really well built, rock solid. It has 2 microphone outputs with independent controls. It has 2 sets of outputs that you could use for 2 sets of monitors if you wish. The thing is really, really, really good. It sounds excellent, and it's built like a tank. The drivers are really good, really solid. And it has loopback, which is a very important feature if you are a content creator and you want to do something where you're doing a video tutorial on mixing and you want the sound from Pro Tools or your DAW to go into, say, ScreenFlow, and also your vocal mic to go into ScreenFlow, and that you want to be able to mix that later. That's what loopback is all about. And the ID44 Mark II has loopback. And one thing I would do if I was the singer-songwriter type is I would get 3 mics. I would get a good vocal mic, whether it's a large diaphragm condenser or a large diaphragm dynamic for my voice. And then I would get a stereo pair, a matched stereo set of small diaphragm condenser mics that I would use for instruments, recording stereo acoustic guitars or stereo anything, stereo overheads. And you could really, really do a lot of damage with just those 3 mics. And a 4-channel audio interface. Maybe if you've got a few extra bucks kicking around, you can have a dynamic and a condenser, large diaphragm condenser, and just plug them all in and have them just ready to go. And if you get curious about more higher end mics, you don't have to go all the way up to these expensive, cost prohibitive Neumanns. There's this whole tier of manufacturers, like Mojave makes the M300, Telefunken makes the Copperhead. There is a mic from Roswell called the Delphos, and there's another one called Colaris. All these mics come around $1,000, but they can go toe-to-toe with microphones that cost 3 to 10 times the price. But what I would encourage you to do is on any of these mics, you can go to Thomann, you can go to YouTube, listen to them. Thomann is particularly good because they have audio examples of nearly everything they sell, all the instruments, all the microphones, and you can listen to male singers, female singers, acoustic guitar, what have you, and you can really hear what you're getting, and you can make an informed decision. What I notice about the small diaphragm condensers is almost always the more you spend, this is the same as studio monitors, you could almost depend on the more you spend, the better it's going to be. With the vocal mic, the large diaphragm condenser or the dynamic mic, it's not necessarily the case. It has to do more with how it deals with your voice. So maybe a $400 mic like the SM7B will outshoot a $7,000 plus tube condenser mic from Neumann. That depends on you. But no matter what you do, no matter what mics you choose, no matter what preamps you choose, the one thing that matters the most is how you treat your room and how you could monitor what it is you've recorded. Beyond that, all that matters is your ideas, your music. I would suggest to you to get the DAW of choice. Once you have it all set up in the room, get your DAW of choice. Get some emulating plugins that will emulate the Neve 1073, the API, the SSL. And really this is for the EQ and the compression sections, because the mic preamps can't really be emulated. Yeah, maybe the harmonic distortion can, but not the interaction between the mic and the preamp. That's something that's lost if you've recorded through something else, and you cannot recover for example, transient response from one mic preamp to another via emulation. And I'll try and demystify preamps in another video. I'm also going to demystify microphones in yet another video, talking about the topologies and getting past all the brand names and knowing what kind of mics are good for what kind of a task. So you can maybe subscribe and look for that in a future video. So this brings me to the most critical part of recording. You may have heard the term, get it right at the source. And what get it right at the source means, first of all, the only way you can possibly do that is, at the risk of being redundant, having a well-treated room. Getting it right at the source means getting the source right. The right guitar, the right snare drum, the right vocals, the right vocalist, the right tuning, the right performance. That is what you need to get right. And when you get that right, whatever mic you're using, whatever mic pre you're using, these are just tiny details. An excellent recording of a poor performance of a bad song is not any value to anyone. I would much rather have a poor recording of an excellent performance of a great song. That is still going to be entertaining and that is still going to have value and merit. Hopefully, with some knowledge, you will have both. Think of it this way. Expensive gear is like a Ferrari, and affordable gear is like a Hyundai. And if you know how to drive, with either you're going to get to your destination. The Ferrari might be faster, but it is still capable of a car crash. The thing that really matters is your music, your song, your performance. And your challenge isn't what mic you have, but how you capture the sound. The source has to sound good in the room. It has to sound good to your ear. When it does, then your task is to, find the best mic you can, but more importantly, place it where it captures that sound to the best of your ability, to the closest you can possibly get to represent the sound you're hearing in the room. Then mixing is just a matter of carving out things to make things fit together. It's not going to be some magic thing where you fix all these errors you make. You want to record it right to begin with. Keep it about the music. Learn as much as you can. Buy the best gear you can afford. But focus and concentrate on the music because that is what matters the most.